The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bustling streets of downtown Santa Rosa. Darnell Griffith stood amidst the throng of shoppers, a silent observer, his gaze fixed on the urban thread store across the street. He'd parked a few blocks away, wanting the walk, needing the anonymity it offered. The crisp California air, tinged with the scent of exhaust fumes and blooming jasmine, did little to soothe the knot of unease tightening in his stomach. His fingers, tucked deep into the pockets of his deliberately nondescript jeans, fidgeted with the worn leather of his wallet. Urban thread, his creation, his legacy. And yet, these recent customer complaints felt like a crack in the very foundation he'd built. They spoke of a coldness, a dismissiveness, a subtle yet pervasive sense of not belonging, directed specifically towards black customers. The words gnawed at him, echoing in the quiet spaces of his mind. Unwelcome, one complaint had read. Another, ignored. A third, simply invisible. He'd spent the last week poring over these digital missives, each one a tiny, sharp shard of glass lodged beneath his skin. He'd built this company on the principle of inclusivity, of celebrating diversity, and the idea that these whispers of prejudice were taking root within his own walls was unbearable. This wasn't a PR crisis to be managed. It was a sickness in the heart of his creation that needed a cure. No press releases, no carefully crafted statements. He needed to see it for himself. Raw, unfiltered. He needed to understand. The thought, real raw, unfiltered, what happened when the man who signs the checks walks in and nobody knows his name, sparked a flicker of grim amusement in his chest, a small, sardonic flame against the growing chill of apprehension. He adjusted the brim of his plain baseball cap, a conscious effort to further obscure his features, and took a deep breath, the cool air a momentary brace against the unsettling flutter in his chest. He crossed the street, the rhythmic tap of his sneakers against the pavement a steady counterpoint to the chaotic symphony of city sounds. Each step felt heavier than the last, a growing weight of anticipation and dread. He paused at the entrance to the store. The bright, vibrant window displays a stark contrast to the shadows that seemed to cling to him. He took another breath, steeling himself, and pushed open the glass door, the chime announcing his arrival a sharp, metallic clang in the otherwise muted hum of the store's interior. The air conditioning washed over him, a welcome reprieve from the afternoon heat, but the coolness did little to quell the nervous energy that thrummed beneath his skin. He took a moment to orient himself, his eyes scanning the brightly lit space, taking in the meticulously arranged displays of clothing, the vibrant colors, the trendy designs. He saw Alana, a young employee, her back to him, engrossed in folding a stack of brightly colored t-shirts. He also noted Dre, a more senior staff member, leaning casually against the counter, scrolling through his phone, seemingly oblivious to the world around him. Darnell deliberately adopted a casual, almost hesitant gait as he approached the clothing racks, his fingers lightly grazing the fabrics as he passed. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Not really. He was looking for a feeling, an atmosphere, a clue that would unlock the puzzle of these complaints. He reached out to touch a soft, cotton sweater, the texture pleasing beneath his fingertips. He was contemplating the color, a deep, rich burgundy, when he heard a voice. "Can I help you?" Alana's voice was flat, almost bored, lacking the warmth and enthusiasm one would expect from a retail employee. He turned to face her, forcing a small, uncertain smile. Internally, he winced. He hated this. The charade. The feeling of being tested. He'd always believed in leading from the front, in being visible and accessible to his employees. This felt like a betrayal, a necessary deception that left a bitter taste in his mouth. "I'm just browsing," he replied, his voice deliberately soft, tinged with a hint of shyness. He saw Alana's eyes flick over him, a quick, dismissive assessment, before returning to the task at hand. The small smile he'd managed to conjure faded. He felt a prickle of irritation, a flash of anger. He swallowed it down, reminding himself of his purpose. Observe. Understand. At that moment, the door chimed again, announcing the arrival of another customer. A white woman, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, entered the store. Before Darnell could even process her presence, Alana's demeanor shifted, transforming instantly from detached indifference to bright, almost overly enthusiastic helpfulness. "Welcome to Urban Thread. Is there anything I can help you find today?" Her voice, now brimming with warmth and energy, was jarringly different from the tone she'd used with him just moments ago. Darnell watched, a cold knot forming in his stomach, as Alana showered the new customer with attention, offering styling suggestions, pulling items from the racks, and generally exuding an air of helpfulness that was conspicuously absent during his own interaction. He stood there, forgotten, a silent observer to this stark display of differential treatment. The casual observer he had intended to be was replaced by a man witnessing his values crumble before his eyes. He felt a wave of shame, a burning heat rising in his chest, not for himself, but for his company, for the culture he'd inadvertently allowed to fester. He looked over at Dre, who seemed to be studiously avoiding eye contact, his attention fixed on his phone. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The air in the store, previously cool and refreshing, now felt thick with unspoken tension. Darnell's mind raced, grappling with the implications of what he was witnessing. This wasn't just about bad customer service. This was about something deeper, something more insidious. This was about the insidious creep of unconscious bias, the subtle, often unintentional prejudices that could poison even the most well-intentioned environments. He knew he couldn't stay silent. He had to act. The rhythmic pulse of hip-hop throbbed through the Urban Thread store, a carefully curated soundtrack designed to appeal to the young, urban demographic. Darnell, his baseball cap pulled low, let the music wash over him, a familiar comfort in this space he'd built. Yet, a disquiet hummed beneath the surface, a discordant note in the otherwise harmonious retail symphony. He'd arrived unannounced, a ghost in his own kingdom, seeking the truth behind the whispers of discontent reaching him from online reviews and hush conversations. Unwelcoming, some had called his stores. Cold, the words chafed, leaving a bitter residue on his tongue. He wandered through the racks, his fingers brushing against the fabrics, each texture a testament to years of meticulous planning and design. His gaze swept over the graphic tees, the vibrant hoodies, the denim wash to the perfect shade of urban grit. This was his vision, his legacy woven into the threads of the clothing. Yet, the air felt different today, charged with a tension he couldn't quite place. He observed a silent predator in his own hunting grounds, searching for the flaw in the ecosystem. A young woman, Alana, her name tag gleaming under the fluorescent lights, stood behind the counter, her attention fixed on her phone. Her fingers danced across the screen, her expression a mask of bored disinterest. Darnell watched as a white customer approached the counter, a question in his eyes. Alana's demeanor shifted instantly, a smile blooming on her face, her voice warm and welcoming as she guided the customer through the store, her hand gestures animated, her laughter echoing through the space. Darnell felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He wasn't imagining it. The difference in treatment was stark, a chasm opening between perception and reality. He continued to browse, feigning interest in a bomber jacket, his mind racing. 5 minutes bled into 10. He was invisible, a shadow lurking in the periphery. He could almost feel the weight of Alana's indifference, a tangible force pushing him further into the margins. Is this how my customers feel? He wondered, the question a sharp jab in his gut. The thought unsettled him, a tremor in the foundation of his carefully constructed empire. He moved closer to the counter, picking up a denim jacket, the fabric cool and stiff against his fingers. He examined the stitching, the distressing, the details that set his brand apart. He needed a larger size. He needed to break the spell of invisibility. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a low rumble, attempting to inject a note of casual inquiry. Alana glanced up, her eyes flitting over him, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths before her gaze returned to her phone. A beat of silence hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Darnell felt a surge of anger, a hot flash of resentment. He swallowed it down, reminding himself of his purpose. He was here to observe, to understand. "Could you help me find this jacket in a larger size?" he repeated, his voice carefully neutral. Alana finally looked at him, her expression a mask of disinterest. "I think that's all we got out there," she said, her tone dismissive, her words clipped. "If it ain't there, we don't have it." She gestured vaguely towards the racks, her eyes already drifting back to her phone. Darnell felt the blood drain from his face, the casual indifference a slap in the face. He fought the urge to reveal his identity, to unleash the storm brewing inside him. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of his mission. He needed to understand the root of this behavior, not simply punish the symptom. "She doesn't see me," he thought, the realization a cold, hard stone in his chest. "She doesn't see a customer. She sees what?" He struggled to define the unspoken bias, the invisible barrier that had sprung up between them. It was more than just indifference. It was a dismissal, a subtle but potent message of not belonging. He glanced at the white customer who had received such attentive service just moments before. The man was now at the register, chatting amiably with Alana, a shared laugh echoing through the store. The contrast was jarring, a stark illustration of the two realities existing within the same space. Darnell felt a wave of weariness wash over him. He had built this company from the ground up, poured his heart and soul into creating a brand that represented his community, his vision. And yet, here it was, tainted by the very prejudice he had sought to overcome. He looked at Alana again, her face now animated, her voice warm and engaging as she interacted with the other customer. The disparity gnawed at him, a deep, visceral ache. He knew he couldn't let this stand. He had to act, but not yet. He needed to gather more information, to understand the full scope of the problem. He needed to see if this was an isolated incident or systemic issue. He picked up another jacket, pretending to examine it, his mind churning, formulating a plan. The music pulsed around him, the rhythm now a mocking counterpoint to the silent tension crackling in the air. The fluorescent lights hummed a monotonous tune, a stark contrast to the vibrant pulse of the hip-hop track leaking from the store speakers. Darnell shifted his weight, the stiff denim of his jeans rustling against the plush velvet of the armchair. He'd chosen the seat strategically, nestled in a shadowed corner near the fitting rooms, offering a clear view of the sales floor. His disguise was simple: a baseball cap pulled low, a nondescript jacket concealing his tailored shirt, but effective. None of the staff had recognized him, the CEO of Urban Thread, observing his own kingdom incognito. He ran a hand over his close-cropped beard, the familiar prickle against the skin a grounding sensation in the swirling unease settling in his stomach. He'd come seeking answers, seeking the source of the growing number of complaints about unfriendly service at this particular branch. So far, he'd found only an unnerving quiet. Alana, the young woman with intricately braided hair he'd seen earlier, emerged from the stockroom, her face set in a mask of mild boredom. She glanced at him, her eyes flitting over his figure with an almost imperceptible flicker of dismissal before settling on the middle distance. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the rustle of clothes on hangers and the distant murmur of conversations. He watched as she straightened a display of graphic tees, her movements mechanical, devoid of any real engagement. Is this it? He wondered. Is this the cold shoulder our customers are talking about? He felt a prickle of frustration, a tightening in his chest. He'd built this company from the ground up, poured his heart and soul into creating a brand that resonated with his community, and this casual indifference felt like a personal betrayal. He chided himself internally. He needed to see more, gather more data before jumping to conclusions. The bell above the door chimed, announcing a new arrival. A young white woman, dressed in athleisure wear, strolled in, her gaze sweeping over the merchandise with an air of casual confidence. The transformation in Alana was instantaneous, almost unsettling. Her face lit up, the boredom replaced by a welcoming smile. "Hey, welcome in," she chirped, her voice imbued with a warmth that had been conspicuously absent moments before. "Let me know if you need help with anything." Darnell watched, his stomach twisting into a knot. He wasn't imagining things. The contrast was stark, undeniable. It wasn't simple laziness or poor training. It was something deeper, something more insidious. Unconscious bias. The words echoed in his mind, a cold, hard truth settling in his gut. He shifted in his seat again, the velvet suddenly abrasive against his skin. He'd hoped it wasn't this. He'd wanted to believe the complaints were isolated incidents, easily rectified. This was a systemic issue, a reflection of a societal disease that had somehow infected his own creation. He glanced across the store at Dre, a more senior employee he'd recognized from company events. Dre was leaning against the counter, idly scrolling on his phone, seemingly oblivious to the interaction unfolding before him. Darnell watched him, a flicker of hope igniting within him. Perhaps Dre would intervene, offer assistance, balance the scales. But the seconds ticked by, and Dre remained engrossed in his phone, his world seemingly contained within the glowing rectangle in his hand. The hope withered, replaced by a deeper, colder disappointment. It wasn't just Alana. It was the entire atmosphere, a silent complicity that allowed this subtle discrimination to flourish. He felt a sudden urge to stand up, to confront Alana, to demand an explanation. But he held back, the years of experience as a leader reminding him that impulsive actions rarely yielded lasting solutions. He needed to understand the root of this, the underlying reasons for this disparity in treatment. He needed to dissect the problem, layer by layer, before he could begin to heal it. His mind raced, formulating strategies, planning his next move. This wasn't just about customer service. It was about the very soul of Urban Thread. He had a responsibility to his employees, to his customers, to the community he served. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, steeling himself for the battle ahead. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to intensify, a buzzing reminder of the work that needed to be done, the change that needed to be made. The fluorescent lights hummed a monotonous tune, a counterpoint to the rhythmic thump of hip-hop leaking from strategically placed speakers. Darnell leaned against a display rack laden with distressed denim, the rough fabric a stark contrast to the smooth, cool marble beneath his fingers. He watched as the white customer, clutching a vibrant orange sweater, sailed towards the counter, a small smile playing on her lips. Alana, her name tag glinting under the lights, straightened. A different Alana emerged, one with a practiced, almost dazzling smile. Darnell felt a strange twist in his gut, a mix of anger and a cold, creeping disappointment. He'd seen this kind of transformation before, not in retail, but in boardrooms, in hushed hallways, in the subtle shifts of body language when power dynamics shifted. He just hadn't expected to see it here, in his own store. "I absolutely love this," the woman chirped, holding up a sweater. "Do you have it in a medium?" Alana's smile broadened. "Let me check for you right away." Her fingers danced across the keyboard, her movements quick, efficient. "We do. Would you like me to bring it out for you?" The woman beamed. "That would be fantastic." Darnell watched the transaction unfold. Each polite exchange, each gesture of helpfulness, a sharp jab against the memory of his own dismissive treatment. He pushed himself off the rack, a sudden resolve hardening his features. He walked towards the counter, his footsteps echoing lightly on the polished floor. Alana was now carefully folding the orange sweater, placing it in a crisp, branded bag. As the white customer turned to leave, their eyes met briefly. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, recognition, pity, before she offered a polite nod and walked away. Alana turned back to the register, her smile fading as quickly as it had appeared. Darnell stood directly in front of her, arms crossed. Dre, who had been restocking a nearby shelf, glanced over, his expression unreadable. "Do you all treat all customers like this?" Darnell's voice was quiet, controlled. He held Alana's gaze, searching for a flicker of understanding, a hint of remorse. Instead, he saw a flash of annoyance, quickly masked by a practiced neutrality. "I just said we don't have it," she replied, her tone flat, almost bored. She avoided his gaze, her fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the counter. Darnell could almost hear her internal monologue, a dismissive wave of his presence, an eagerness to be rid of him. He recognized that the unconscious dismissal of someone deemed unimportant, unworthy of attention. He took a step closer, the subtle scent of his cologne, a blend of sandalwood and citrus, filling the small space between them. "I wasn't asking about the sweater," he said, his voice still low, but with an edge of steel. "I was asking about the service. The stark difference in the service." Alana finally met his eyes, a spark of defiance flickering within their depths. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice tight. Dre, sensing the escalating tension, approached the counter. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his tone cautious. Darnell turned to him, his gaze sharp. "I think you know exactly what's going on here, Dre," he said, his words laced with a quiet fury. "You saw how she treated me. You saw how she treated the other customer." Dre shifted uneasily, his gaze darting between Darnell and Alana. "Look, sir," he began, his voice placating. "Sometimes we get busy, and things get overlooked." "Overlooked," Darnell repeated, his voice rising slightly. "I was standing right here. I asked a simple question. I was dismissed, ignored, and you stood by and watched it happen." A wave of shame washed over Dre. He had seen it, of course, the dismissive flick of Alana's hand, the curt tone of her voice. He'd seen it countless times before, not just from Alana, but from himself, from others. He'd allowed it to become the norm, the unspoken rule. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some semblance of an apology, but the words caught in his throat. Alana, emboldened by Dre's attempt to defuse the situation, spoke up. "Sir, if you're going to keep causing a scene, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Her words hung in the air, sharp and brittle. The unspoken accusation that he, the black man in worn jeans and a simple T-shirt, was the problem hung heavier still. Darnell felt a cold knot tighten in his chest. This wasn't just about a sweater. This was about a culture, a system, a deep-seated bias that had permeated his own company. He looked from Alana to Dre, his gaze steady, unwavering. "You think I'm causing a scene?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. "I own this store, and you just show me exactly why so many of my customers feel unwelcome here." The silence that followed his words was thick, heavy with unspoken truths. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to intensify, filling the sudden void. Dre's face paled. Alana's eyes widened, her bravado crumbling. The air crackled with the weight of the revelation, the turning point where denial shattered against the hard reality of truth. The fluorescent lights of the small office hummed, a monotonous soundtrack to the tension thickening the air. Darnell leaned against the metal desk, its surface cold against his palms. The room, barely large enough for a desk and 2 chairs, felt like a pressure cooker. He could smell the faint, chemical scent of cheap air freshener attempting to mask the musty odor of old paperwork. Dre sat opposite him, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over Darnell's shoulder, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the rhythmic tapping of Darnell's foot against the linoleum floor. He watched Dre, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He'd known Dre for years, seen him rise through the ranks, respected his dedication. This was a different Dre, a man shrouded in a discomfort that went beyond a simple reprimand. Darnell drew a slow breath, the stale air catching in his lungs. He hadn't wanted this confrontation to be so personal. He'd hoped for a quick, clean resolution, a chance to mentor, to guide. But the casual disregard he'd witnessed, the subtle but unmistakable dismissiveness, had burrowed under his skin, festering. He needed Dre to understand, truly understand. "Dre," Darnell began, his voice low and steady, "I need to be honest with you." He paused, searching Dre's face for any sign of recognition, any flicker of understanding. There was none, only a rigid stillness. Darnell pushed on. "I'm not just a concerned customer. Dre's head snapped up, his eyes finally meeting Darnell's. A ripple of confusion crossed his face, quickly replaced by a dawning horror. The blood drained from his face, leaving him ashen. Darnell saw the moment it clicked, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He watched as Dre's carefully constructed composure crumbled, replaced by a raw, vulnerable fear. It was a look Darnell recognized, the look of a man staring down the barrel of consequences. Darnell shifted his weight, the metal leg of the chair scraping against the floor, the sharp sound echoing in the small room. "I'm Darnell Griffith." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Dre's breath hitched, a strangled sound trapped in his throat. His eyes, wide with disbelief, darted around the cramped office as if searching for an escape. An escape from the reality of the situation, from the weight of his own inaction. Darnell imagined the frantic thoughts swirling in Dre's mind, the rapid calculations, the desperate scramble for justification. He could almost hear the internal monologue, a frantic whisper of regret and self-recrimination. Dre's lips moved, forming silent words. Then he swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "Mr. Griffith," he finally managed, his voice barely a whisper, raspy with a sudden dryness. He looked like a man caught in a lie, stripped bare of his defenses. Darnell pushed off the desk, the sudden movement making Dre flinch. He felt a pang of sympathy, a flicker of regret. He hadn't meant to intimidate, but the situation demanded a certain gravity. He walked slowly towards the window, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the room. He looked out at the bustling street, the vibrant energy a stark contrast to the suffocating tension within the small office. He needed a moment, a breath of air, a chance to gather his thoughts. Turning back to Dre, Darnell said, his voice quieter now, laced with a weariness that went beyond the day's events. "I'm not here to play games, Dre. I'm here because I receive complaints. Complaints about the very thing I just experienced firsthand." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I'm not looking for excuses, Dre. This isn't just a bad day. This is a bad pattern, and it needs to stop." Dre finally looked at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and fear. "Mr. Griffith, I didn't," he stammered, his voice cracking. He looked like he wanted to disappear, to melt into the cheap linoleum floor. Darnell sighed, rubbing a hand over his tired face. He knew Dre understood. He saw it in the slumped shoulders, the averted gaze, the trembling hands. The realization wasn't just about the immediate repercussions, the potential job loss. It was about something deeper, something more fundamental. It was about the realization of complicity, the silent acceptance of a culture that allowed such behavior to flourish. "Dre," Darnell said, his voice softer now, "we've worked together for a long time. I respect you. I value your contributions. But this," he gestured around the small office, encompassing the entire store, the entire company, "this can't continue." Dre remained silent, his head bowed, his gaze fixed on his clasped hands. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken words, with the weight of years of ingrained biases, of overlooked microaggressions, of a culture that had allowed a chasm to grow between intention and impact. Darnell leaned against the window frame, watching the play of sunlight and shadow on the street below. He felt a deep sense of disappointment, not just in Dre, but in himself. He'd built this company, brick by brick, with the intention of creating something more, something better. But somewhere along the way, something had gone wrong. The values he held dear, the principles he believed in, had become diluted, lost in the day-to-day operations, in the pursuit of profit. He turned back to Dre, a new resolve hardening his gaze. This wasn't just about reprimands or disciplinary actions. This was about a fundamental shift, a change in the very fabric of the company culture. He needed to address the root cause, the unconscious biases that had taken root and flourished, poisoning the very essence of his vision. He needed to rebuild, to re-educate, to re-establish the values that had once been the bedrock of Urban Thread. And he needed to start now. "Dre," he said, his voice steady, "we have a lot of work to do. The fluorescent lights of the small office hummed, a dull counterpoint to the rhythmic thump of the bass leaking in from the sales floor. Darnell sat opposite Dre, the older man's broad frame almost overflowing the cheap plastic chair. The silence hung heavy, thick with unspoken tension, the echoes of Darnell's revelations still vibrating in the air. Dust motes danced in the pale beams of light, a silent ballet against the backdrop of the stark white walls. Darnell could smell the faint chemical tang of cleaning supplies, mingling with the lingering scent of Dre's cologne, something musky and a little too strong for the cramped space. He watched Dre's hands clasped tightly in his lap, the knuckles white against his dark skin. He saw the tremor in his fingers, the subtle clenching and unclenching, a physical manifestation of the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. Darnell understood. He knew the weight of responsibility, the sting of having your shortcomings laid bare. He'd felt it himself countless times on his journey to building Urban Thread. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the controlled inhale of familiar anchor in moments of stress. This isn't about blame, he told himself, pushing down the lingering irritation. It's about understanding, about change. I know this isn't easy to hear, Dre, Darnell began, his voice low and steady. But this store, he paused, searching for the right words. He didn't want to accuse, to alienate. He needed Dre to be his ally in this. This store represents me, my name, my values. His gaze met Dre's, a silent plea for understanding in his eyes. Dre shifted in his chair, the plastic creaking beneath him. His eyes, usually bright and jovial, were now clouded with a mixture of shame and confusion. He swallowed hard, the movement visible in his throat. He's taking it in, Darnell observed. Processing. Good. I built this company from the ground up, Dre, Darnell continued, his voice gaining strength. Brick by brick, I pour my heart and soul into every stitch, every design, every store. He tapped his finger lightly on the worn surface of the desk. And what I saw out there, he shook his head, the image of Alana's dismissive behavior flashing before his eyes. It goes against everything I stand for. Dre's lips moved, as if he wanted to speak, but no sound came out. Darnell could almost hear the frantic whirring of his thoughts, the internal struggle to reconcile his own actions or inactions with the image Darnell had painted. Darnell leaned forward slightly, his voice softening. I'm not saying you're a bad person, Dre. I know you. You've been with me for a long time. But sometimes, even good people can perpetuate harmful behaviors without realizing it. Finally, Dre spoke, his voice low and raspy. I didn't see it, Mr. Griffith. I saw Alana talking to you, but I didn't see it. The last words trailed off, laced with self-reproach. Darnell nodded slowly, acknowledging the confession. I understand. It's insidious. It's woven into the fabric of our society. He paused, gathering his thoughts. This is the crucial part, he thought. The turning point. You don't have to love every customer, Dre, he said, his voice firm but compassionate. But you will treat them with respect. Every single one, regardless of their race, their background, or how much they're spending. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. Less charged, more contemplative. Dre's gaze was fixed on the floor, his brow furrowed in thought. Darnell could sense the wheels turning, the gradual shift in his perspective. What do we do now, Mr. Griffith? Dre finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Darnell felt a surge of relief. The question, so simple yet so profound, signaled a willingness to change. This is it, he thought. The first step towards a better future. We educate, Darnell replied, a sense of purpose solidifying within him. We train. We create a culture of awareness and accountability. He paused, considering the next steps. I'll have Kendra organize some sensitivity training for all the staff. We'll implement new customer service protocols. And we'll talk, openly and honestly, about these issues. Dre nodded slowly, absorbing the information. And Alana, he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Darnell considered this. Punishment wasn't the answer. Not yet. Alana will be a part of this process, he decided. She needs to understand the impact of her actions. She needs to be a part of the solution. Dre's shoulders relaxed slightly, the tension visibly easing from his frame. That's fair, he agreed. She's young. She can learn. A flicker of a smile touched Darnell's lips. Hope, he thought. It starts with hope. He looked at Dre, a renewed sense of optimism filling him. We all can, he said, his voice steady and resolute. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed less intrusive now, a subtle backdrop to the quiet understanding that had settled between them. The air, once thick with tension, now held a different kind of weight, the weight of shared responsibility, the promise of change. The muted hum of the store's ventilation system was a dull counterpoint to the throbbing pulse in Darnell's temple. He gestured towards the small, sparsely occupied sitting area near the entrance. Alana followed, her footsteps hesitant, echoing lightly on the polished concrete floor. He could feel the weight of her gaze on his back, a mix of confusion and apprehension. Sunlight streamed through the large storefront windows, casting elongated shadows that danced across the brightly colored displays. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee, emanating from the small cafe tucked away in the corner, did little to soothe the tension that had settled like a thick fog in the air. He chose a simple metal chair, its cool surface a stark contrast to the heat gathering beneath his collar. Alana perched on the edge of the opposite chair, her posture stiff, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The vibrant hues of her carefully applied makeup seemed at odds with the pallor of her skin. Darnell watched her, the silence stretching between them like a taut wire. He wondered if she remembered him, if recognition flickered beneath the carefully composed mask of her face. He doubted it. In her eyes, he'd been just another face in the crowd, easily dismissed, easily forgotten. The thought left a bitter taste in his mouth. "Do you remember me?" he asked, his voice low, each word deliberately measured. Alana's eyes widened slightly. She blinked, the rapid flutter of her lashes betraying a sudden surge of anxiety. He could almost hear the frantic whirring of her thoughts, trying to place him, to decipher the meaning behind his question. "I'm not sure," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. He leaned forward, the metal chair scraping against the floor, the sound amplified in the sudden stillness. "I was here earlier," he continued, his gaze unwavering. The man in the faded jeans and the worn-out baseball cap. Recognition flickered in her eyes, then solidified into a mixture of fear and understanding. Her carefully constructed composure crumbled, replaced by a stark vulnerability that made him momentarily hesitate. He saw the blood drain from her face, leaving her lips a pale shade of pink. Her breath hitched in her throat, a small, choked sound. He could almost taste her fear, thick and cloying, filling the space between them. You're, she began, her voice trembling. "Darnell Griffith," he finished, the words hanging heavy in the air. He watched the realization dawn on her face, the understanding morphing into a chilling awareness of the gravity of her mistake. He saw it in the way her shoulders slumped, in the way her eyes darted around the room, seeking an escape that wasn't there. "I didn't," she stammered, her voice barely audible. Darnell held up a hand, silencing her. "You saw someone walk in who didn't look like money," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Each word was a precise strike, chipping away at the wall of denial she was desperately trying to erect. He could almost feel the resistance emanating from her, a palpable force pushing against him. "You made a decision," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "A decision based on assumptions, on preconceived notions. You decided I wasn't worth your time." Alana's silence was a deafening admission. She looked down at her hands, her knuckles white as she gripped them tighter. He could see the shame etched on her face, the regret churning in her eyes. He sighed, the sound heavy with weariness. This wasn't about blame, not entirely. It was about understanding, about dismantling the insidious nature of unconscious bias. "But that's exactly the problem, Alana," he said, his voice softening slightly. "That unconscious bias, that split-second judgment, it creates a barrier. It prevents us from seeing each other as human beings, as individuals." A tear escaped her eye, tracing a path through her carefully applied makeup. She made no attempt to wipe it away. He saw the flicker of genuine remorse in her eyes, a glimmer of understanding that pierced through the fog of her fear. I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I didn't realize," he nodded, acknowledging her apology. "It's not always about what we realize, Alana," he said gently. "It's about the impact of our actions, regardless of our intentions." He paused, giving her words time to sink in. He watched her carefully, searching for a genuine connection, a flicker of empathy. He saw it in the way she met his gaze, in the subtle shift in her posture, in the gradual easing of the tension in her shoulders. He knew then that she was listening, truly listening. "Think about the message it sends," he continued, his voice low and resonant. "The message that says some people are more deserving of respect than others, that some people are more worthy of our time and attention." He saw the understanding deepen in her eyes, the realization of the wider implications of her actions. He saw the shame replaced by a dawning awareness, a sense of responsibility. The turning point had arrived, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a crack in the wall of denial. The hum of the ventilation system seemed to fade into the background as a new silence descended, a silence pregnant with the weight of unspoken words, with the potential for change. The fluorescent lights hummed a sterile tune, a stark contrast to the vibrant energy that pulsed through the store during opening hours. Dust motes danced in the pale beams, illuminated like tiny constellations in the otherwise dim space. Darnell ran a hand over the cool, smooth surface of a display table, the ghost of the day's events clinging to the air. The silence was thick, pregnant with unspoken words, with the residue of Alana's dismissive glances and Dre's averted gaze. He felt a weariness seep into his bones, a deep-seated fatigue that went beyond the long day. It was the weight of disappointment, the gnawing unease of realizing that the values he believed were woven into the fabric of urban thread were, in reality, fraying at the edges. Kendra leaned against a clothing rack, arms crossed, her expression thoughtful. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with a shared understanding of the gravity of the situation. She had witnessed the charade, the carefully constructed disguise crumbling under the weight of Alana's prejudiced behavior. He knew Kendra was waiting patiently for him to break the silence, to articulate the storm brewing within him. Firing them would be easy, Darnell finally said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet store. The words felt hollow even as he spoke them. He knew it was true, a swift, decisive action, a clean cut, but would it heal the deeper wound? Would it truly address the root of the problem? He doubted it. But growth doesn't come from running away from mistakes, he continued, the conviction growing stronger with each word. He pushed himself away from the table, the movement restless, mirroring the turmoil in his thoughts. He could almost feel Kendra's gaze on him, a silent acknowledgement of the truth in his words. He knew she understood, not just on a professional level, but on a deeper, more personal one. They had built urban thread together, brick by brick, fueled by a shared vision of creating not just a successful business, but a community, a space where everyone felt valued and respected. This incident, this small crack in the facade, threatened to unravel everything they had worked for. Kendra pushed herself off the rack, the metallic clang echoing in the stillness. "So what's the plan, Darnell?" Her voice was calm, steady, the anchor he needed in the swirling sea of his thoughts. He appreciated her directness, the absence of platitudes or false reassurances. She knew him too well for that. He turned to face her, his mind racing. Images flashed before his eyes, Alana's disdainful expression, the white customer's oblivious smile, Dre's passive acquiescence. Each image was a shard of glass, sharp and painful. He closed his eyes briefly, trying to sift through the chaos, searching for a path forward. "We need to address this head-on," he said, opening his eyes, his gaze meeting Kendra's. "Not just with Alana and Dre, but with the entire team." "Training," Kendra suggested, her voice barely above a whisper, as if testing the weight of the word. Diversity and inclusion training, but not the usual generic kind. Something that truly resonates. Something that forces them to confront their own biases. He nodded, the idea taking root, solidifying into a plan. Yes, something experiential, something that puts them in the shoes of the customer, that makes them feel what it's like to be judged, to be dismissed. He paused, the image of his own experience still vivid in his mind. The subtle sting of being overlooked, the slow burn of indignation. He wanted them to understand, not just intellectually, but viscerally. And accountability, Kendra added, her voice firm now, the earlier hesitation gone. We need to create a system where these kinds of behaviors are addressed immediately, where there are consequences. Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of responsibility. He knew she wasn't just talking about reprimands or disciplinary actions. She was talking about a fundamental shift in the store's culture, a move towards radical transparency and open communication. A knot of tension began to unravel in his chest. He could see a path forward, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. It wouldn't be easy, he knew. Changing ingrained behaviors, dismantling unconscious biases, it was a long, arduous process. But it was a necessary one. He owed it to his customers, to his employees, and to himself, to the values that had been the bedrock of Urban Thread from the very beginning. We'll start with this store, he said, his voice gaining strength, the weariness receding. We'll make it a model, a pilot program. We'll work with Alana and Dre, give them the opportunity to learn and grow. He could see Kendra's slight nod, her approval unspoken but palpable. And then, he continued, we'll roll it out across all our locations. We'll create a culture of empathy, of genuine respect, where every customer feels valued, seen, and heard, regardless of their background or appearance. He took a deep breath, the stale air of the closed store suddenly feeling lighter, fresher. The silence that had been so heavy just moments ago now held a different quality. It was no longer the silence of disappointment and despair, but the silence of anticipation, of the quiet hum of a plan taking shape. It was the silence of hope, a fragile seed planted in the fertile ground of change. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he also knew, with a certainty that settled deep within him, that it was the right road. It was the road that would lead them back to the heart of Urban Thread, to the values that had once burned so brightly, and that would, with time and effort, ignite once more. The air in the Urban Thread store hummed with a different energy this week. Fluorescent lights, usually casting a cold, indifferent glow, seemed warmer, softer. Alana fidgeted with the hem of her Urban Thread-branded polo shirt, the fabric suddenly rough against her skin. The familiar scent of denim and freshly laundered cotton hung in the air, but today it felt heavier, laden with the unspoken. Last week's incident, the hushed whispers that followed, the tension had all culminated in this mandatory staff meeting, a training session specifically on unconscious bias. Alana's stomach twisted. She'd barely slept, each replay of the encounter with Mr. Griffith, the man she'd so casually dismissed, a fresh sting. She hadn't known. How could she have known? The thought offered a fleeting comfort, quickly replaced by a deeper, more unsettling truth. She should have known. Folding chairs scraped against the polished concrete floor as employees settled. Alana avoided eye contact, her gaze fixed on a loose thread on her sneaker. Shame, thick and suffocating, clung to her. The memory of the white customer, the effortless charm she'd employed, the almost instinctive deference, it was a stark, ugly contrast to her treatment of Mr. Griffith. Had she really been that dismissive? The answer echoed in the hollow spaces of her regret. Yes. Dre stood at the front, his usually jovial face etched with a seriousness that made Alana's heart clench. He cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the sudden stillness. Last week, he began, his voice low, something happened in this store. Something that forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about our culture here. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled staff, lingering for a moment on Alana. The weight of his look, the unspoken understanding in his eyes, was almost unbearable. Alana's internal monologue was a chaotic whirlwind. Dre was going to address it publicly. He was going to dissect the incident, lay bare her prejudice for everyone to see. A wave of nausea washed over her. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to become invisible. Dre continued, his voice gaining strength. I witnessed a colleague, someone I respect. He looked directly at Alana, his gaze unwavering but not accusatory. Treat a customer with disrespect. And I did nothing. I stood by silent. And by doing so, I became complicit. His words hung in the air, heavy with self-reproach. Alana sucked in a sharp breath. He was taking responsibility, not just for his inaction, but for the entire situation. The knot in her stomach loosened slightly, replaced by a strange mix of gratitude and guilt. He was shielding her, deflecting some of the blame, even though he deserved none. The training session began, a cascade of uncomfortable but necessary conversations about implicit bias, microaggressions, and the importance of creating an inclusive environment. Alana listened intently, absorbing every word, every statistic, every anecdote. The veil of ignorance she'd unknowingly worn was lifted, revealing the pervasive nature of prejudice, its subtle but devastating impact. A new awareness bloomed within her, painful yet liberating. She saw her own biases, the subtle ways in which she judged people based on their appearance, their clothes, their demeanor. The casual assumptions she'd made about Mr. Griffith's attire, his presence had clouded her judgment, preventing her from seeing him as a person, as a valued customer. As the session progressed, Alana's shame morphed into a quiet resolve. She wouldn't let this be just another training session, a fleeting moment of awareness. She would actively work to dismantle her own biases, to challenge prejudice wherever she saw it. The training concluded with a simple, powerful statement from the facilitator. Everyone who walks through these doors, she declared, her voice resonating with conviction, deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their race, their gender, their background, their anything. Her words echoed the sentiment printed on a newly hung sign, its bold letters a stark reminder of the store's renewed commitment. Here you matter. Period. The words hung in the air, a tangible shift in the atmosphere. Alana looked at the sign, the simple declarative sentence resonating deep within her. It wasn't just a slogan, a marketing ploy. It was a promise, a commitment to change, a reflection of a new beginning. Later, as the store emptied and the evening shadows lengthened, Alana found herself standing before the sign, tracing the letters with her fingertips. Here you matter. Period. The words whispered a promise of a different future, a future where judgment and prejudice would be replaced by empathy and understanding. A future she was determined to help create. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, she knew. Unlearning ingrained biases, confronting her own prejudices, it would be a continuous process, a journey of self-discovery. But as she looked at the sign, at the simple, powerful message it conveyed, a flicker of hope ignited within her. It was a start, and sometimes a start was all it took. The silence of the store was broken only by the gentle hum of the air conditioning, a constant, steady presence, a silent witness to the transformation taking place, both within her and within the walls of Urban Thread. The scent of denim and cotton no longer felt heavy. It was the smell of new beginnings,